Alrighty, so today we are going to cover technical resume writing. So this is my resume workshop guide that I've basically produced after working with students for over 15 years on technical resumes, and also working with recruiters, looking at what they want. I have a separate resume tips document for an FBI sort of focused federal government resume. So if you're interested, I will also share that with Zena as well as on the listservs. We have a cyber jobs fair every semester. This semester, the cyber jobs fair is on September 12th from 9 a.m. basically to 4 p.m. So please keep that in mind. I think times before that cyber jobs fair, we will be asking for people to submit their resumes so that they can be included in a resume book. I also have actual companies saying, hey, can you send us that resume book by a certain time? And that's really important to get your resume in there because it's also considered by companies as well. So who am I? My name is Tamira Pan. I'm the academic coordinator for digital forensics. I mainly focus on the undergraduate Bachelor's of Science in Digital Forensics, which is a NSA Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense Education. And basically, I have over 15 years of experience in IT and cyber. I have my master's in information science and information systems and technology. I also went up to candidacy with a PhD for information assurance and a secondary specialization in bioinformatics. I am on the board of directors for the Hudson Valley ISACA chapter, which is the Information Systems Audit Control Association, as well as on the board for the Northeast Collegiate Cyber Defense League, which runs the Northeast Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, which is a part of the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition across the US. In addition, I also am the faculty advisor for the Cyber Defense Organization, the Digital Forensics Association, the ISACA Student Group of Albany, and the Women in Cybersecurity Club as well. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions about those situations. I also helped develop the curriculum for the undergraduate program, and I did teach courses in information security policies, information use and issues in criminal justice, and business continuity, Excel, databases, and enterprise application development. So in terms of the agenda today, I'm gonna go back if I can. We're gonna cover general resume tips, including the recruiter perspective, or if it's not an actual real recruiter, the applicant tracking system perspective, general resume content and important elements, other resources for resume critique, as well as final summary and thoughts. So how would you describe a resume? What do you think that it's supposed to represent? Yes.
Essentially a summary of what you can bring to the table and organization insight.
Yeah, I would say that that is a pretty good representation of what it is. So you are giving a company, a recruiter, your resume, and you're hoping that by giving the recruiter this resume, that they should be able to see all the things that you have that would be relevant to the job, so they can see how good of a fit you are, or see potential in you that they would want to hire you. And this could be skills, right? Like technical skills, like experience with a certain software program or certain operating systems, but it could be other things like leadership experience or your softer skills like presentations, your ability to write, publish. So it includes lots of different elements. Some of the ways that you can show technical expertise that we'll talk about are things like a separate technical skills section, which is very common, obviously, in a technical resume. But other ways are, of course, your educational background and GPA, the other honors and achievements that you may have, which could include things like certifications, other courses that you've done. If you've done professional development, you've gone to specific conferences, you've done projects in or out of the classroom. And if you've had work experience or leadership experience, which could be, work that you've done for or without pay. And also things like extracurricular activities and community service. And there's more too, which we'll cover. So we live and are constantly getting more experiences, right? You're doing more and more things. And it can be hard to keep track, especially if you are writing a different resume for different types of jobs that are looking for different focuses and targets. It's rough to keep track. And that's why I do recommend that you keep a curriculum vitae. Normally, I recommend it in the FBI federal government style because they tend to ask for everything, such as supervisor names, contact, hours worked per day, the actual phone numbers for that supervisor or the HR. If you go maybe 10 years down the line and you apply then for a federal government position, if you didn't write this down somewhere, it will mean lots of searching through whole bunches of paper, calling the company, and just a lot of extra work, right? So it's better just to have something where you keep on collecting all of your information in a comprehensive document. And then you pull things from that to make a tailored resume to target different areas. For example, you might want to have in the MS-DFCS program, a resume targeted towards risk positions. And then you might have another one targeted towards security operations. I also will say that they're generally 1 to 2 pages for those specific job resumes, unless you are applying to an academic or a government position, in which case they want everything. Put everything in, use your comprehensive resume. The FBI wants it because they're gonna do the background check anyway, and the more they have, the less work they have to do. And especially at the graduate level, if you're a graduate student and you have that work that will fill those 2 pages, fill up the 2 pages. So some resumes are seen by actual recruiters. You can go to a career fair and a person will look at it. You can be applying to a job and sometimes a real person is going to be looking at your resume eventually. They don't have a lot of time to spend finding everything. So there was one time where we were asked by the London Stock Exchange to provide them with resumes from our resume book for cyber jobs and finding people who fit certain criteria. I swear, as I was like going through over 100 different resumes, I knew that the GPA was somewhere, but I kept on looking and I was spending more than 6 seconds. But people who are the recruiters will not do that. They will not spend that extra time. If they can't find something within that first glance, they're going to just pass you over. And so you have to make sure that the important elements of your resume are highlighted. So another thing that I said previously is that it's not necessarily a person who's going to be reviewing your resume. Oftentimes, and if you look here, 99% of Fortune 500 companies, 70% of larger companies, and even 20% of small to medium-sized businesses use applicant tracking systems to be able to go through your resumes. In which case, your acceptance of going on to that second part of maybe interviewing is dependent on whether those applicant tracking systems are finding those keywords that they are looking for, which sometimes are determined by HR. So I'm giving a sample job description here just as a review point. This is for a digital forensics and incident response analyst in EY for 85 to 150K. And I highlighted specific terms that I think are important to focus on, right? You see there's a lot of language, but look at incident security risks, look at that they're a part of cyber defense. They're talking about technology tools, policies, and standards. They're looking at security systems, incident response, forensics, malware analysis, remediation, assessment, communication as well. Then we go to key responsibilities, and they're looking for the ability to investigate, coordinate, resolve, forensically analyze, do analysis, right? Identify incidents, interface and communicate. So they use communication in both places, right? Security, incident response, access, digital artifact collection, containment, consultation. maintain, manage, improve, and update reporting metrics. And then there's the actual knowledge and skill requirements. Integrity in a professional environment, right? A global mindset, different cultures. Knowledgeable of standards in security incident response processes, procedures, team, right? Team building, social communication, and writing. They put communication 3 times. So you know that in some way, your resume and cover letter should probably have communication either clearly explicated, which at least it should at least once, right? Or it should also indicate how good you are at communicating in other ways. And then they go more into the experience and qualifications. They talk about e-discovery, and I will go forward from this, but always pay attention to the job description, because that's what generally those systems and the people who are reviewing your resumes are going to use to evaluate your resume to see if you are a good fit for a position. So there are other recommendations too that the industry has to make sure that your resume is also not thrown out from an applicant tracking system as well. They recommend the usage of bullets. This is also for someone who is reading it, just because unless you're applying for like a C-suite type position where there are only maybe 1 or 2 or a handful of applicants, and they can spend the time to really review a story like type of resume, people don't got time for that or the energy and focus for that. So bullets are a lot better. Use the words directly from the job description, because oftentimes that's what's going to be used in those keyword searches that the applicant tracking systems use. And in fact, if you look at guidance from the industry, it will say you need to list things multiple times. There's the frequency of those keywords that also matter when they're reviewing your resumes. Look at the company website, do research on the company, look at any news items, look at what maybe their targets are, what are they projecting? What is their services that they offer, or products that they offer? What are their values? Make sure to repeat them, yeah. Also, if you're looking at acronyms, their applicant tracking system may have the acronym for something, or it may have the full word for something. And that way it's best to include both so that you get caught either way. Also try to use specific fonts that are supposedly better to read. And also try to avoid graphics, unless you were a marketing person, and maybe that might be something that you might do because that is that field. But otherwise, it could cause that applicant tracking system to sort of freeze and not be processing your resume. Be consistent with your punctuation, capitalization, and formatting. I actually had a reviewer tell me, you know, a lot of people, they use different hyphens all over the place. Like sometimes it's a long hyphen, sometimes it's a short hyphen, sometimes there's a space before and a space after, or spaces on both sides. And I didn't actually pay that much attention before, but I was like, okay, people are looking into those details. And you should also too, because let's say that you say in your objective or in your cover letter, I'm detail oriented, and you have these small mistakes. Then it becomes something like, this person isn't really detail oriented. Only include accurate information. Yes, not good to present misleading or false information on your resume. And also have others review your resume. There's some things that people can catch. They can have different perspectives. They can evaluate things in a different way. And they may know something about you that you've forgotten about yourself. Also make sure you use the correct tense, because you could be working in a position now, right? You finished some projects, those are past tense. You're currently doing something, that's present tense. And you know you're going to be doing this project in the next month, and that could be future tense. So we're gonna go over specific elements of the resume. First up is your contact information. Do not include things in your header or footer, because even though it gives you more space in your resume, it also sometimes is ignored by those applicant tracking systems. And also put it at the top. You could think about using an alternate first name sometimes, but sometimes if you're an international student, some people think you should do that. Or if someone's a woman, sometimes they may think of using just their first initial. But then there's also the thought that if you are having a company that judges you based on these things, maybe you don't want to be working at that company to begin with. So it's thoughts about that. Also, include your email address. Try to not include any funny sounding names that you may have had for years when you were in high school or middle school. Like, I don't know, Roblox is fun, 495. My daughter's into Roblox. Have something that includes your name, generally. For phone number, make sure to include your area code. This is something that I brought up before. People oftentimes will use the area code that they know. Like, for example, here, 518 is our area code. People may assume that you know that it's 518, but when you're submitting to a company, there's no way that we know. People are also from different places. Like, you're from Florida. Somebody could be from California. We can have different area codes. And if you don't send one, they won't know how to contact you that way. For your address, put where you will be if you get the offer, right? Or where you are now if you're going to get a response. You can have a permanent address and you can have a local address. We talked before too, if you're providing your address information, you don't necessarily have to give all of it. You could just include the city, state, and the zip code. And keep in mind too, that you want to include the zip code because again, those applicant tracking systems may be limited. There is a recent legislation law in Colorado where it requires people to list the salaries for salary transparency. Some organizations decided not to hire people in Colorado due to that restriction. And so they might use zip code as a way of filtering out people who might be in Colorado. Others will also filter based on locality, just because they may not offer a moving bonus. They want people who are local. Also, we are in the age of social media. LinkedIn is something that you definitely should have. Make sure that you include it because they're going to be searching for it anyway. You don't want them to find somebody else who has a similar name to you and think that it's you because you don't know what they're doing. They're not you, but somebody could accidentally think that that person is you, and good or bad, it will be reflected on. Also, make sure that you use a short URL, which you can find information on. I can also look for the link as well, because normally it might be something like Demira 9AG31, but you can get in/LinkedIn or linkedin.com/in/Demira. Yeah, I have a question.
So if you are a student and you are more than willing and able and able and moving to the city where the job and think is located, but your zip code is currently 122 Albany, how do you indicate that you're interested in moving so that you can get past that box?
So something that I would recommend for people who are willing and able to relocate is to indicate so on your resume, as well as include that in your cover letter as well. Okay.
Well, it's funny because you said that
Yeah, they will. And I would also contact their HR and see what they recommend, because their company could be looking clearly, or if their applicant tracking system is searching for a specific zip code, they might recommend that you put their location and zip code as well. Yes. It is advisable to include your LinkedIn. It's not required, but as I said, they could accidentally find someone who is the similar name to you and think accidentally that that person is you. And so to avoid those sorts of things, sometimes it's better to include. The other important element that I highly recommend is a summary or profile at the top of the page. As you know, there is not necessarily a lot of focus. And so if you can grasp somebody's attention within those first 3 sentences after your contact information, if they find something within here that's interesting enough, they will then pay more attention to those points when they're looking further into your resume. You can include things like hardworking and conscientious and leader, especially if they're asking for it. Like in the previous example of the job description, they listed communication 3 times. You want to list communicator in some way if you are applying for that job in your resume. But also tailor it to who you are. Don't make it something very vague that can be applied to anybody who's applying or to 75% or 90% of the people who are applying. Make it specific to yourself. Yes. Mhm.
So how do you know?
Okay. So I would say that this is a summary for when you're targeting to a specific position. There are times when you will not have a specific position available, in which case an objective statement is probably more relevant, especially for like an open-ended career fair where they're accepting students who are doing marketing jobs, they're doing forensics jobs or computer science jobs or finance jobs. And so then you should say, I would like a job in this area. So here's an example of how to describe yourself in words. Try to be creative and unique, but also represent what you really are. I do recommend sometimes asking your friends or your family and people who know you well to describe you because they're going to know you best. And sometimes it's hard to think good things about ourselves. So there are some situations where you'll be given or find available a template. I always recommend when you're applying for a job to look at that company's website. They might have a career related section where they have either recordings or interview examples or interview formats or a template for the resume, in which case definitely use their format. Use their advice because they know who they're hiring for. And in terms of organization, I do typically recommend education to be first, then relevant technical skills, then relevant projects, and then work experience and leadership. But your resume is supposed to be best representing you. And if you have excellent work experience and leadership, and you want to highlight that, then put it first if it's more relevant, because every resume needs to highlight yourself the best, right? And every person is different. So in terms of education, I'm also going to highlight here that your formatting matters. When you look at text, what do you pay attention to the most? The bold, right? Like the bold font. And then if it's italicized, if you're trying to read it, it's a little bit harder, right? And then when it's just italicized, you don't really pay much attention to it at all. And then normal text, you pay attention to it like if you were reading. But if you want something to stand out, it should be in bold. And normally I recommend your degree to be one of those things that's bolded. And I recommend the dates to be italicized because really that shouldn't be too relevant. If they want to pay attention to dates, they can feel free to focus on that a little more, but otherwise they should be able to ignore it if they want to. Also, there's a question about high school experience. Oftentimes people will leave out their high school experience because they're like, oh, it's been so long. I don't know if it's important anywhere. I was told I should only include maybe the last 2 years of things that I've done. You should include huge accomplishments. If you were the captain or vice captain of athletic teams or participated in competitions, or you've done research projects, if you publish papers, if you did things like the Olympics, right? It doesn't matter how long ago you did it. If you told that to anybody, they'd be like, wow, that's amazing, right? If they like that sport, or even if they don't like that particular sport, but they know about the work that's involved in athletics, that will also be something that people will respect. I remember reading an article in a business magazine before about Olympians, right? And it's also more relevant this year because of the with Olympics. But they would take anybody, colleges would take anybody, like organizations would take anybody who has been an Olympian because the work that they do, the work ethic that they have, the dedication, their ability to, manage oftentimes branding, right? Social media, that is experience right there that you cannot, you know that it's relevant and transferable. Also include honor. So all of these things are here basically because sometimes people forget them. And this is a prompt to make sure that you're thinking about things like if you were on the dean's list or on the commendation list, if you've gotten internal, external scholarships, like the Masters in Digital Forensics Cybersecurity for architects, we have sometimes the NSA scholarships that you might have gotten before your start of the program, and you should definitely include that. If you've been invited to any honor societies, if you have certifications, I will say that we are a CompTIA Academy, which I have applied for. And let me know if you're interested in getting the link where you can get discounted vouchers to take the CompTIA exam. So in addition to those specific industry certifications, there are also tool-specific certifications as well. And then you can do things like course completion certifications like Linda, or like the forage.com, which I talked to you about. You can also have profiles. For example, GitHub, if you have programming that you've done and programming projects. Bug Crowd, if you've done bug bounties or bug hunting, where you're doing some ethical hacking for organizations to be able to find exploits and vulnerabilities so that they aren't released to the public. If you do that, please make sure that you remain in scope and check. These are optional, but obviously in certain fields, they definitely add value. They show that you're doing something beyond your education, and also show sometimes that you're able to independently work and learn, because a lot of things, especially I think in all fields, they're changing rapidly. There's so much evolution that's going on that to show that you have the ability to learn things as time goes on, I think is really important. Another thing that oftentimes people will not remember to include is if they have military experience, they might not include that they have secret clearance, especially in an organization. If you work for a defense company, if you work for the federal government or in the military, or if you work with data or information that could be security related, it's really great to have a security clearance or to show that you have the ability to get one, even if it was in the past. And so include those things because, it means that you have at one point passed the background check. Also make sure to include military honors, like a meritorious service medal. I include this because I have had students who have had military experience and they had a meritorious service medal and they were like, I don't think I should include that. And I was like, why not? So you'll see technical skills in a non-technical resume as well. And in those type of resumes, you will at least see something like Word, right? And Excel and PowerPoint. But for a technical type of resume, this is a really important section. And you should make sure that you include things like operating systems, software, things like Word and Excel. Sometimes a job will actually ask for Excel experience, but don't list it first, right? Put it in the middle, because if you learn from psychology and education, people will normally pay attention to the first thing a lot, right? They'll remember that. They'll pay attention to the last thing. The things in the middle tend to be more forgotten. I think at this point, people will assume that you have Microsoft Word experience. So you don't have to put it in a place of importance. So we're going to go over some other things as well, specifically to technical skills. And keep in mind, this is not something that you will all know. These are just samples of things that you can discuss. In addition, something that I don't have is specific operating system versions, which you do want to list, except for Windows. Please list the versions because that may or may not be relevant to the company. And I also list foreign languages or as well, or you can do languages other than English, because it could be relevant. For example, the United Nations, they do require you to know a language other than English, and they do have a digital forensics unit. So, oh. Oh, that's a good question. So the reason why I bold specific areas is because it does bring emphasis to that. Ideally, right, if you had enough space in your resume, you would want to have spaces in between those different areas, but sometimes we don't have the luxury of extra space. So this does create a way of paying attention to, let's say, oh, I want to see their database skills. I really want to pay attention to the networking. I'm not going to look at anything else, but I'll look at that networking line. And it just brings focus onto those areas. And here's an example of digital forensic skills. And I'm actually going to hopefully have time to give you some tips for an AI categorization based on a job description. But as you see here, it's not just the software that I include. You can also include things like reporting, policy, procedure, and plan development. If you remember the job description that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, they didn't just talk about software. They didn't just talk about technical things, right? They also talked about reporting. They talked about metrics. They talked about communication. So if they list it, have a space for it if you have a relevant content. It's the same thing with information security, as you can see also. It goes into things like open source intelligence with the acronym, and then it has things like Maltego, the harvester. So you can have subcategories within a specific category as well. You can have the specific tools. So it's also about concepts. Here's a sample way of organizing a work experience or leadership role, where the dates and the city and state, make sure you include the city state. People often forget to include that, and that is important. If it's remote, you can list remote. If you have a company that is remote, list remote. Also, make sure that you keep yourself open to including unpaid or volunteer work. And this can include student clubs if you had a leadership role, as well as if you were a TA or a peer educator, and even more formal mentorships as well. And it's also, oh, yeah.
For the position, the company's position, is it city state? If the company has a site
Headquarters.
for
Yeah.
something, would you put remote or would you put the address of the?
So I would say it depends on how you interacted with the company, but I think either way would be accepted, because if you were interacting with a specific section only of a company that was maybe headquartered in Albany, New York, you could list Albany, New York, and that would be fine. If it was for a remote job, maybe it would be good to list remote, because then you would show that you would have past remote experience. So I think that you could play it by ear and decide on your own whether you would want to list the location, city, state of the unit that you're working with, or if you wanted to put remote. Also, I would say that when you're listing your work experience, there is a tendency to list things chronologically. But then again, when you're reviewing a resume, you are reviewing it from top to bottom generally, right? And so by doing that, you are doing a disservice to yourself, because you're not making it easy for the reviewer to be able to find the most relevant items that will fit that job. So I recommend making it easy for the reviewer, right? The more ways that you make things easy for a resume reviewer, the more likely they're going to find things that make you an ideal candidate. So list it by relevance. And again, people pay more attention to the first and last entries. Change the order for your resume based on where you're applying to, right? Make those tailored resumes, but highlight those things that are relevant for the position. Use action verbs. Here's a link to our University Office of Career Professional Development with action verbs that you can use, because sometimes it's hard to always put responsible for, which you shouldn't anyway. But some people might also use manage all the time. And then you see 3 manages in a row. And it's good to add some, language variety. It may help you if you're already in contact with a past supervisor or colleagues to ask them how would they describe your job and what functions that you perform. And it could also help to refer to similar job descriptions. Here's another case where actually AI could be used to generate a sample job description or bulleted points, and you can use and then edit whatever you think is appropriate for your job. Don't just copy paste. And also try to quantify. A lot of people may word something like talking about the company, I find. And that is a mistake. You need to be representing what you have done. What have you accomplished? What are those quantifiable metrics of accomplishment? So another thing people don't think about either is that sometimes there's some flexibility in your title or position for a job. You can even ask your supervisor, can I word my title? Can I change my title to this instead? Because I feel like this is not appropriate. Something that can sort of be related to this is state positions. So there's a information technology programmer analyst position at the New York State Information Technology Services. But some people are web developers, some people are database administrators, some people do like e-discovery systems, some people do security work. That is not representing that job, right? So obviously you can use another title to discuss that. There's a working title versus the actual title of your organization. Also, there might be situations where you are working at an organization and you may not think that there's anything relevant to the field that you want to be in. But there could be ways to talk about changing your job or adding elements that would be relevant. Like I had somebody who was a part of a military organization, and then I encouraged them to say, hey, why don't you see if you can maybe start shadowing the networking group or the IT group or the security group, right? And they actually might give you a chance. Even in Target, they have a digital forensics unit. And we had one student who started out as an undergraduate working in Target and then ended up in their digital forensics unit. We also have like lots of companies that are larger companies. They might hire from within, like USPS. They have a specific security arm where they appreciate having employees who have worked with them because they understand their organization. So there's always ways that you can add elements that will make a current job that you have more associated with where you want to be. So as I was saying before, it's not about the content that is currently in a resume when you do a resume critique, because it's often what's in somebody's head and what you've left out and maybe not talked about. And it could be things like you thinking that, oh, this is not important. But we tend to doubt ourselves, right? And we tend to underappreciate what we've accomplished. And so include everything in your comprehensive resume, in your CV, because there's no knowing where something that you've done or what something that you've done is going to be maybe seen as valuable. And then that resume critiquer, whoever they are, can then be like, oh, well, I don't think this is as relevant. Or maybe this part is relevant and you should highlight this. And again, yeah, your actual work may reflect a different job position. As we talked about before. I will also tell you too, which is very strange. Sometimes people can be hired for something, and then because of their skills, they might actually end up with different job duties because they realize that using you for another role is probably a better way of taking advantage of all you have to offer. Another thing I would say is when you apply for jobs, do not be afraid to apply as long as you think you fit more than 50% of the job description. Do not be ashamed. We have alumni who come back and said they applied for a job. That's the one piece of advice that they'd want to share is apply for it if you think you fit more than 50%. I have a story of somebody who developed their own API, right? And the company was asking for more years of experience with that API than was possible. This person was the creator, and they knew that, right? If anyone had, there's nobody who had more experience than this person in that API because they developed it. And the job description asks for more experience. So there are some situations where you'll get somebody asking for an entry-level position and then requiring something like CASSP, which is for security, after 5 years of job experience. A way to get past that sometimes with the applicant tracking system is to say, studying for the CISSP exam, expected this date. And then it will actually capture CISSP and get you through that next level to explain to the actual people who are going to be working with you that, hey, I can't get the CISSP yet because that's something that I can't take until after 5 years. So these are things that I want to add as questions that you can ask yourself that might help you quantify, might have not been considered. So things like, have you done any internal certifications? Like, for example, at the Apple Store, they have their own Apple certifications and tech certifications. Budgeting and project management may be relevant, especially if you are engaged in even providing a business case, right? For work that you want to do. The ability to budget is extremely important. And then when you want to go, and which you may as a graduate student, go into an actual management position, that's going to be something that is going to be looked well on. If there's health and safety regulations, that aligns with compliance regulations. How do you deal with conflict management? There's always going to be conflict. So if you're able to deal well with conflict management and complaints and issues, let's say if you're going to a consulting, you're going to have clients, which aren't always going to be happy, or scope changes, or budgets change, and being able to deal with a situation where feelings are passionate and making sure that things don't go out of control and that, you know, everything is managed is going to be, I think, a essential type of thing for people. They talked about policies, procedures, manuals, documentation. There is actually documentation in that previous job description. And so then you'd want to make sure that if you have that experience, obviously to highlight that. With security legislation or policy, if you deal with PII, which is personally identifiable information, that could be related to confidential information, no matter what job you're doing. Incident response can also be at the loss prevention level, right? So if you've worked in retail, that's something that you may have experience with. And then this is specific to security system administration, but these type of things are also things that you may have experience with that if you haven't included in your resume, that you should try to. It's more of trying to, you know, make sure you're thinking about these things. Again, user acceptance testing, working with requirements analysis. This is more of like a business analysis consulting type of work that you might do. If you've provided recommendations, that means you've done analysis and that you're doing evaluation and recommendations. That also is helpful if you've done things related to sustainability, data analysis, especially if you're doing the business analytics degree, data mining, use of different software for that, and statistical software. Things related to Google hacking may or may not be relevant. If you applied for grant funding or proposed a business case or budgeted for external funding, that can mean certain things as well. I'm giving an example here of a student that was a programming analyst or a programming assistant for UAlbany. And this was their first round. And then this is how we changed it based on me working with her on her resume. As you can see, that is a big difference, right? In terms of specifics. A lot of times people will not take ownership, even if they've done the leadership work. So she actually co-led the coordination with another person. And she had specifically for 2 large-scale events. And then there was no discussion either of that, her doing budgeting or event planning or negotiating with, she did talk about communicating with vendors, but not negotiating with vendors and contracting. And also there was nothing in terms of quantification of the amount of events. So it was more than 60 that she also assisted with. So things that you may not realize, it's going from like, oh, this person may be somewhat involved, right, in this work, to this person led things. They took charge of things. They accomplished a lot. Another thing that I recommend, especially for people who may not have a lot of work experience or leadership experience related to the field that they want to go into, is to make sure that they also have a relevant project section. And so, especially in any tech-related field, this is a good way for you to highlight and showcase projects that you've done in or out of the classroom. I will say, because a lot of people do this, so list things like B4, 520. It's not relevant for you to have to list the course name. They're not going to know what it is. It's more important, what did you accomplish? What did you produce? So do not list those. That's just taking up extra space, and it's not going to be helpful, because even if somebody knows Albany and they took that class in the past, it could have been completely different from what you're doing now. So look at your significant class projects as you're taking them. So this is a great time to do this, because you're thinking about the next year, what classes you're going to take. You can see your syllabus ahead of time, be like, okay, I'm going to be really paying attention. I'm going to list out these class projects and make sure that I provide a detailed resume description. And if you really have good work here that's relevant to the field that you want to go into, include that before your work experience. So these are samples specifically related to security and digital forensics. They actually, for business analytics too, you can do database programming projects for anyone in IT, and fraud assessment, risk assessment. So it doesn't have to be a tech, right, related project. It doesn't have to be a programming project. It can be also things related to developing plans. If you've done competitions or contests, that's a really good way of also assessing your ability to maybe perform technical functions, or to be able to respond to a specific scenario. So last year, or the last 2 years, I've actually worked with a group of graduate and undergraduate students for the New York Metropolitan Chapter ISACA case study competition. And I've also obviously been a part of the Northeast Collegiate Cyber Defense League, which is a great experience to deal with a industry company situation. You have to maintain services while we have actually pen testers who are industry ethical hackers who are trying to break into the system. And then at the same time, we're trying to have the students do responses to business requests from either like a CIO, a manager, things like setting up a security information and event management system, things like setting up a Docker container or virtualization, or like two-factor authentication or a cloud instance. So, you know, these can be really good ways. For the security area, there's something called the National Cyber League, which is offered every semester, where you can take part in it and, you know, get more experience as well. And it creates a virtual environment that's based off of, I think, the Security Plus and Network Plus, maybe Certified Ethical Hacker as well. So it might be something that you are interested in, if you're interested in that area. If you have presentations or publications, also make sure that you include them, even if you're doing it for, let's say, a student club, because it shows that you have the confidence to be able to present to a group, right? Just that by itself means something. It means that you're good at communicating, at least by speaking generally. If you're publishing, that means that you're able to communicate in terms of the written word. It also could mean that you're good at independent research. So these things mean something, right? It's not just what you're taking at face value, it's what it translates into. Also, professional development. Not only is it good to list on your resume, but also they're great avenues to actually meet potential employers, to build up your social networks and your professional networks. So you can maybe find somebody from one of these conferences that you participate in, and then, build a relationship and then end up going to that person's company. Actually, I am a part of the Hudson Valley ISACA board of directors, right? And I have had at least one instance of one of the board members going to work at a company that another board member is at, because you share things, right? When you have your board meetings or you have your meetings together, you're like, oh, we're looking for these people. We can't hire them. You should apply, right? I know you. I know that you have the skills. And so by developing these friendships and these relationships, it's just another place where you have potential way of finding people, recruiting for yourself too, if you're joining an organization, or maybe developing further relationships for professional advancement, for people to give you advice. I have friends that I've developed through the Northeast Collegiate Cyber Defense League, and when one of them was trying to find a new job in Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, my other friend and we went with him. He was giving his speech and his presentation to prepare for the job posting there. We gave him advice. So these relationships are really great. There's also things like virtual experiences. I know at the last session, we talked about theforge.com. It's a really great resource that, again, came out of COVID pandemic, because it was something else before, and it basically collaborates with a lot of different companies and provides what the companies feel is a good mix of skills and knowledge for people that they would want to hire. So it's advantageous for the people who are looking for training, but it's also advantageous to the companies, because then they know if a student or a person has taken that specific module or certification. For one thing, you can also have the HR, sometimes people see who completes your specific module. And also, if you say on your resume, completed the forge.com MasterCard cybersecurity module, and they'll give you specific language. If you go to MasterCard and they look at your resume and they see that, it shows that you have already experienced that they want, because they help generate that content. In terms of extracurricular activities, I know I listed at the beginning a lot of different clubs on campus. You can also check UAlbany, my involvement, for a list of all the student groups. If they're only undergraduate student groups, you can still say, can I participate? You may not be able to be a part of the e-board, but you could also maybe say like, hey, maybe we can make a graduate version of it. And that's also a possibility, but you can absolutely participate. You can also look at the Massry School of Business website for the list of recognized Massry School of Business organizations. There's also specific digital forensics associated groups, and there are leadership groups as well. And also, even if you are in a non-leadership position, consider adding it to work experience as well, if it's domain related and you're doing things. So you might be actively involved even though you don't have a title, but you might be doing workshops. You might be helping with finding guest speakers. So that's the leadership roles that you're. Volunteer work and community service may also be relevant as well, depending on what you're doing, especially if we look at a company's mission and values and business philosophy. If they say that they want to engage communities to make an impact, to build social value, and to improve environmental sustainability, if you are doing things related to that, then it might add a different lens to view you, right? Because when you're being hired for a job normally, it's not that you're just being hired based on your skills. You're being hired as a person who is going to be a part of somebody's team. You don't want somebody who is not great, generally, right? Unless they're absolute genius. And then maybe we might be able to deal with it, but maybe not, right? Like you have to think about the pros and cons. I would personally like to be with the good person who is able to learn whatever they need to be able to do, rather than someone who can come fresh out and can do it, but is not the best person to be around. So people may have gone to other individuals in the past or resources in the past for a resume critique. Oftentimes we might approach friends and family, and that is a great idea. Oftentimes I might say, like, where does your mom and dad work? Where does your brother or sister work? What about your family friends? Is there an in that maybe they could say, like, oh, can you check if there's a position or internship available at this company? So, or there might be a friend of a friend or a friend of a family member who might be able to get you connected. So definitely reach out to them, and they will have their own perspectives, as will everyone. I have my own perspectives too. That's not going to work for everybody. We also have UAlbany's Office of Career and Professional Development, which definitely you should also take advantage of, including resumes. There's also interviewing, practice cover letter critique, as well job search strategy. So you can take advantage of that. We also have the Massry School of Business, John S. Lovato, Office of Career Services, Deirdre Sweeney, who you've interacted with in the past. Department faculty are also excellent resources as well, if they have the time. Adjunct faculty may or may not have as much time because, again, they normally have day jobs, but some adjunct faculty don't sleep, and I think that they really love our students, so you never know, right? It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst they can say is not right now, or I don't have the time. But if you don't ask, then you won't get help. And if you are a digital forensics graduate, security information security, or digital forensics cybersecurity, cyber operations in the master's of digital forensics cybersecurity, you can ask me for help, but not during advanced registration, in which case I will tell you, let's try another time. So final thoughts. Your resume is a living document, or it should be, because you are constantly learning things, you're constantly doing things. And it's really hard, right, to keep track. You should always be updating that comprehensive curriculum vitae, federal government resume format. Always make sure you tailor your cover letter and your resumes to the job position. Have this comprehensive CV, but then take stuff out to make those 1 to 2 page, for you, 2-page resumes. Do not send the same resume to everybody and then question why you're not getting looked at or getting interview offers. Again, also check your junk or spam email folders, because oftentimes they'll use third-party systems, which may go then to your spam filters. Make sure that your resume is critiqued by a lot of people. So some people may pay attention to those hyphens. Other people may pay attention to the domain knowledge. Some people might have different opinions on that summary or objective statement. And so I actually recommend this, right? Have a tiered approach. You have so many resources on campus, and they'll provide you with different things. Go to the university Office of Career Services Professional Development. Go to our John S. Lovato Office of Career Services. Meet with your faculty, your friends, right? And family members. Ask them what they think. And then keep what makes sense for you, right? Think about the contents and their different perspectives. Because in the end, you're the one who's looking for the job. It's your resume, right? You should be happy with what you're sending out. Emphasize your strengths. Someone's resume format is not going to be the best resume format for you. Someone might emphasize their work experience. You might want to emphasize more about your technical skills and your projects. So you put that in order appropriately. Be prepared to talk about everything in your resume. If you put it in there, be able to talk about it. Also, another thing, like if you see in a job description, let's say that you can do 50% on something, but then you see something that says, oh, I want you to have SIEM experience, security, information, and event management. Download Splunk. It's okay to just get the experience right before your application or your interview, right? You can say like, I'm gonna do a tutorial on this before I send in the application. Now you have that experience. You're not lying because you are doing it right before. And that's one way to add something to your credit, right? And to your experience. You don't have to just be like, I have to use whatever I have now. I can't learn anything else before I send in this job application. So be happy with your resume. I'm also going to show you very quickly some ways of using AI, which I hope it works. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I have some thoughts about using AI for resume development. And I do think it can be helpful, but it should not be used as a wholesale solution for resume development. I also have a preference for Gemini because I often find that ChatGPT, unless you're using the paid version, which I don't have, it provides a lot of words, but not necessarily a lot of substance. And it also won't necessarily correct you if you ask for something that it shouldn't be able to provide an answer for. So like if you ask Gemini for like, what stock should I invest in to make a lot of money, it will say, I cannot really do that for you, right? Because it's hard to predict. So I do like using that type of thing. So if you look here, another good thing about Gemini is that, you do get a history and you can show the drafts. So this is a query that I sent in after I edited it and refined my question. So the first draft was based on the key responsibilities in the image, which I copy pasted from the website or the job description, list the technical skills, right? And so this might help you recategorize or make sure you have those specific categories in your resume. Because you saw, right? I had recommendations for information security. I had recommendations for digital forensics. Sometimes people use information security. Some people use cybersecurity. Some people use cybersecurity with one word versus two words. Use the words that they ask for in the job description and in the qualifications and requirements. But this is a good way of being like, oh, okay, this is the job posting and the job description. List a bulleted list of technical skills. And I would say maybe that's a good starting point for how to categorize your technical skills section. Another thing I highly recommend is to use it for preparing a summary or objective statement. And of course, the more that you add the summary, the better it is going to produce a result. So I say prepare a persuasive summary statement of 3 sentences for a graduate student graduating in summer of 2025 with 10 years of IT experience in the financial services industry, completing an MS in digital forensics and cybersecurity, cyber operations track. NSA Center of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity. And as an undergraduate degree in computer science based on the following job requirements. And I copy and pasted the requirements. And it provided this. This is not the first query I had. I did edit it slightly as I looked through the results, but this is actually a decent starting point. Even if you make your own summary, you could always ask AI to be able to make it more persuasive, to be able to make it more targeted to a recruiter, right? Or a technical recruiter. Or you can also say, make this more targeted to a recruiter in risk. So use AI to your advantage, but don't depend on it completely. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes. Is this for the technical skills section? No. Oh, for any specific job. I wouldn't restrict it to a specific number, but ideally, I think you can have subsections within a job because sometimes you might have the same job for a long period of time. So I would say try to maybe make subsections of specific roles or specific responsibilities, and maybe ideally 3 to 5. Oh. I don't think it's necessarily about chronology, like how far back, but how relevant the jobs are to the position that you're applying for. Mhm. Yep. Oh. See what it goes, Zena, or?
So I have application, but they are expired. So should I mention it on my resume? That expired?
So I would say yes, you should list it, or you can put when you got the certification normally. You could say received this date. And then to this date, we can do this to this, like end date, start date and end date. You don't have to say expired, you can just say 2022 to 2024. Yes,
I
Zena.
was gonna ask about the online training, the module companies are putting out there for. It's like.
Yeah.
Employees are those tracked by those employees?
Sometimes. So for specific modules, there was an SAP one where you had the option to send HR your what you did and what you accomplished. And so that was listed explicitly. Any other questions? I don't think there's anybody in the chat. All right. We're good. Thank you very much. Gonna end this.